So in the midst of me doing this and that and going this place and that, is that I do my best to keep it really simple, and not overcomplicated. And this goes back to, my very first teacher in this practice. It doesn't have to make it. Our mind loves to make it so complicated to get there. And the trick is that we're here. All that we're looking for is here. All that we're striving for, all the books that we're reading, all the things we're trying to get to are actually present now. You can't have the later time. So I don't do it for a later something. So if I'm going to be doing something, I want to be as there as possible.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, Savannah family. Thank you so much for being here, for listening, and for all the love you give the show. Remember, you can join our private Facebook group at savannaeast.com/group. That'll redirect you to the private Facebook group where we can approve you as a member. I would love to hear your thoughts on past episodes and ideas for future guests you want to come on the show. In today's episode, we're speaking to Janet Stone. Oh my goodness, I love this episode. She is going to teach us how to discover joy in daily practices that can ground and open our heart. We're going to learn simple mantras that Janet uses throughout her day as a mom, a business owner, and yoga teacher. The history behind some Hindu deities I've always been really curious about, Durga, Vishnu, and so many others. Janet's also going to teach us how to invoke the goddess Lakshmi and invite abundance into our life. She also shares with us how we can move from this place of lack and always wanting more to a practice of enoughness, just feeling content with who we are and what we have. If you don't know Janet, she is a world-renowned yoga teacher. She began studying at age 17 under the teachings of Prem Rawat. In 1996, she traveled to India, the birthplace of her grandfather, and became dedicated to yoga. She's based in Bali and San Francisco and leads immersions, retreats, and workshops all around the world. Janet, thank you so much for taking the time, for being with us today. I'm such a fan of yours, and I'd love it if you'd share with us to open a little bit about your personal story. How did you come to the yoga practice? And tell us about your family, because I know you said that they go back all the way to India.
Yes, well, hello. So nice to connect with you all. And I just did my 23andMe, and, I can't say that in my blood is India, but my grandfather and 3 generations were all born and raised in India. And so, having his influence in my life from the time I was born, and, that on Thanksgivings we'd actually have big curries and chapatis and, that he really grew up, and that was steeped in his blood. And, ironically, the women in that particular family were there doing missionary work while the men were there being doctors. And it just went down the line for 3 generations in Hyderabad, India. And, here you find me now offering mantras and chanting and understanding of the Bhagavad Gita and the best of my ability, in my teacher's teachings, the Yoga Sutras, and, the depth of the teachings that really come out of that region. And here I am sort of now offering that. And so there's a sweetness in that irony, and also just a gratitude for the time that my family had spent there and the ripple effect that had on my life.
And you started practicing yoga at a young age, I think. Is that true? How did you come to the mat for the first time?
Well, funny enough, it had absolutely zero to do with a mat. It had everything to do with a cushion, meaning to say I actually, at 17, was introduced to Maharaji, his name is Prem Rawat. He's my meditation teacher, and really started sitting and listening to him wherever I possibly could. I was living in Boulder, Colorado at the time, but would really sort of move around and look for wherever he was going to be, and was steeped in his community, and really just the understanding of what it is to be simple, really be simple in the breath and be simple in the body, and to be joyful and really not chase the complicated journey of the thoughts, and, to let the body be in poise, but also really supple. So, I would say that it had, I was racing mountain bikes and snowboarding and jumping out of airplanes and rock climbing. I was very much in my body in a very different way, but I had found meditation with him. And I didn't really find asana until many, many years later. I was taking a hiatus from my film career in Los Angeles, and I was actually in India and met someone who was in the Shivananda lineage, and just sort of started waking up to asana practices, but have kept my meditation practice from the time I was 17.
I would love to know, and I'm sure listeners too, has that meditation practice stayed basically consistent, like what you were practicing at age 17 till now, or has it evolved, and have you tried different styles? I think people are always so curious, right? It's like, what kind of meditation are you practicing? And we have all these labels for things, right? Like Vipassana and, different things like that. But can you tell us more about what your personal practice looks like?
For sure. And I so appreciate you pointing that out, only in that I actually don't call it often meditation. I was sort of using it as a framework here, but I call it sitting, only to alleviate some of the misconceptions and all the stuff that our mind then wants to put on a body being still, and really a journey of becoming witness. So I wouldn't even say a style anymore. And so, yes, it has evolved. It has evolved quite a bit in that, once I had kids, and once, life has just turned in many different directions. And for me, just the basic notion that on a day-to-day basis, I roll out and put my butt down immediately on a cushion and sit there. I've tried doing all the asanas and all the pranayamas first, and then sitting and doing this and that. But honestly, with the structure of being a mama and living a traveling lifestyle and holding a sangha here in San Francisco, what works is that I just roll out, sit down, and I'm there. And if I add some of the techniques that I've used through Prem Rawat, if I simply sit in pranayama, breath awareness, if I just sit in witness. So quite honestly, it's just allowing space, being in my body, quieting some of the doing.
I think it's great that you're sharing this, because it ties into what I know you wanted to talk about today, which is this idea of enough, having enough, being enough. I think so many of us on this yogic path, we think, oh, well, we need to be doing 90 minutes of asana, right? Like every morning, and following that up with a bunch of meditation. And we have this projection that our teachers who we admire and, travel to study with are doing that too. And through doing these interviews, it's like the more and more I talk to incredible people like yourself, the more I learn that the practice is very meldable and flexible to what's going on in their life. And I think it's really great to share that. So thank you. And I have a couple more questions. So is this something that you try to do every morning? Is it consistent in the sense, because I know you have kids and you're traveling. I was really surprised when I spoke to Shiva Ray, and she said she does almost always her practice at night, which I thought was really cool, because I think, again, so many of us feel pressured that morning time, it has to happen. So can you walk us through like what the daily kind of schedule looks like for you?
Yeah. Well, yes and no, meaning to say that with a mama's life and with on the road life and traveling, I have to be flexible. You really have to be fluid. If I'm going to make this has been 30 some years that I've been in a meditation practice and asana practice for 20 years. And, really, if you're going to make this sustainable practice that lives through everything that life has to offer, then it has to be dynamic and movable. I can say pretty clearly that if I don't have and I don't create the moment in the morning, then it is so easy. It is so easy to get out of it, meaning to say, not show up for yourself in that way. And so for me, the morning time, and that's just my body and my constitution and, how I notice the structure of my avoidance, just like anybody, we all go through our times after 20 some years, 30 years of finding ways to trick yourself out of doing the things that are actually healing, nurturing, grounding, supportive, and of course I've gone through my 3-hour a day practices where that was the way it was. And it was that way every day. And it was hardcore. And, I also get to wake up and recognize that there are many beautiful, potent ways of living this practice, so that I engage in mantra while I'm doing dishes. I engage in pranayama while I'm carpooling a bunch of kids across town, while I'm flying across the globe to lead or offer something somewhere. So meaning to say, it is available at any moment. So whether I'm sitting in my airplane seat and giving myself that opportunity, but as on a day-to-day basis, for sure, the morning seems to be the time when, before my mind starts to jump into all the ways that I must be absolutely needed in the world at this exact moment, that to sit down, to move, to breathe is really feels imperative. And also to do my dinacharya, just the daily ritual, whether it's the abhyangas and the tongue and nasya and nidipats and all that good stuff.
I love all of those self-care things as well. Share with us some of your favorite mantras that you're using right now.
Oh my goodness, right now, listen, Brett, I am full on into the Hanuman Chalisa, and talk about a time commitment and a meditation. I've been playing around with the Chalisa for a good decade or so. So the Hanuman Chalisa, really written by Tulsi Das, a lover of Sita and Ram, and a devotee of Hanuman. Hanuman sort of representing devotion and your ways of giving toward both Dharma, the highest path and the strength of the pillars of the teachings, and earthly being, our body and our infinite nature. And he, Hanuman, is sort of represents the heart being. The Chalisa's 40 verses plus an intro plus an outro. And that may not sound like a lot, but in a language that is not your natural tongue, in Sanskrit, it's fun, it's hard and wonderful. And it's a way to bring my attention from what feels like a ceaseless barrage of drama right now, in this last year, and with what's going on here in our nation, but also in the world. And there's something that feels like it's off kilter. and in this small endeavor, in this beautiful, heartfelt practice of doing the Hanuman Chalisa, I'd say right now, presently, that holds so much potency. But I'll also say that I have so many chants and mantras that are so alive.
So that sounds like what you're doing when you want to go really deep and you have a lot of time. But if you're willing, share with us some of the things that you mentioned that you're doing, like while being a mom and carpooling and doing dishes. And because I'm sure myself as a impending mother and a bunch of the listeners too, it's like those practical tips are so helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And, they're more simple than we imagine, believe it or not. So obviously we're all wrapped up in our samskaras. We just are in these grooves of behavior and reactivity that we are not ourselves even fully aware of. And so much of the practices of yoga are a journey of unwinding or healing or integrating or digesting these behaviors so that we can be more clear and present in the moment. Yeah. So really, since the time my kids were young, it was, just oming with them and oming. And that was for me, the chanting, sweet mantras, morning, noon, and night, really just when I would notice myself get reactive or them get sort of, in their toddler years, digging their heels in, and then you start to want to dig your heels in. And I would take it back to story too, really stories. And I would use stories of the deities. I would use chanting that just melted so much. Now, as they're older, I get a little bit more like eye rolling, Mom, chanting, but really just so many of those practices are so full on within them and within myself. And so now it truly is ways in which I position my physical body so that I can feel grounded, so that I can feel my breath roll in and out, ways in which I take the daily mundane tasks of bill paying, of getting them where they need to go, of appointments, and do my best to infuse it with whether I'm working on the yamas, the foundation of this practice really, or the niyamas, the ways in which we clean up our internal or external world, and just fuse in a day where I'm going to focus on satya, truthfulness. And yeah, it's infinite. This practice is alive in everything that we do.
I love the idea of bringing it into paying your bills and all of those mundane activities. I think sometimes people think it's like, oh, well, huge yoga teachers, they don't do that, right? It's like, no, everyone has that. Tell people, because I think a lot of folks, the chanting piece of the yoga practice is maybe one of the most intimidating pieces for them, right? Whether it's kirtan or working with mantra. If people just don't get it, right? Like they're like, I'm not really sure about this whole chanting thing or kirtan. Can you tell listeners like why they might want to consider it and like what the benefits are and what your experience has been?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really tied into the bhakti yoga practice, and bhakti yoga, the yoga of the heart. And that sounds so oversimplified, and quite honestly, it is. And yet, the way in which we want to either hide behind our intellect or intellectualize a teaching, right? Or we want to only be in body and think we need a rectangular rubber mat to be on to have yoga. That bhakti for me is the practice of living really both creating a clear pathway back to my heart or spiritual heart where I understand, there's a possibility of living within duality, and that duality fades in the heart space or the spiritual heart space, that hridayam. So chanting for me, and I've noticed for many, all the various words that are constantly and tapes that are constantly running through our head. If you take just an Om, no drama, no big Hanuman Chalisa 40 verses, Om, and you feel it's resonant, and your mind for a moment stops from its forward and backward projection, and you're just there, Om, 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 and you're in that resonance, then that's just you. Or then maybe you want to bring in an intention that you're feeling a lot of lack of clarity, and you want to bring in more clarity, more discernment, more dropping away of some of the noise. And then you want to invoke that aspect. And for me, that would be my understanding of Durga, right? And so then I start adding this word in and these offerings to Durga. Jai Ma Durga, Jai Ma Durga, Jai Ma Durga. And for me, this remembrance of clarity, drop away some of the delusions and misperceptions and cut through some of the confusion.
Tell listeners Durga, because that's a god, right? But I know it's translated so many different ways.
Yeah, right. So to sort of wind that all the way back is that any of these aspects that we're calling to, that I'm personally calling to, are really all variations of the one. So there is nothing separate. There's only one, and there's oneness. And yet, since we all live embodied, we all live with our boundaries of our skin and our house and our stuff, that we understand aspects. And so in that, when these deities were sort of coming forth in this tradition, they understood that people needed something outside of themselves to really give their attention to, because it's hard to look at yourself and go like, I am a goddess, I am a god, I am pure divine energy. So we have these aspects, we have these variations. Durga being a kind of a Shakti, a feminine aspect of the one. She carries many weapons to cut through the bullshit, really, quite honestly. And she rides forth with fierce compassion. Like she rides a tiger, her face is loving and calm and compassionate, and yet she carries this sword of just, I am not going to linger in what is maybe based on pure egoic or where we live in our delusions.
I want to ask you about the different Hindu gods and goddesses, because I think what you're saying, everything being just a different manifestation of the one, is something that people are sometimes like they don't know or they're confused about, right? People are like, well, is Durga the same as Kali? Or, how are these two different?
Absolutely. Well, in ways of the mind attempting to make sense of this whole thing, a very basic breakdown in that within the one, within the whole, there is, in a sense, a beginning, a middle, and an end to everything. And that's to our breath cycle, that's to our day cycle, that's to our season, year, life.
I think we can relate to that with the Om, right? It's like birth, life, death, or creation.
Right, exactly. And that's sort of, goes for any understanding of the deities or the beginning understanding of the deities, in that we have Brahma, you have Vishnu, and you have Shiva. Brahma is said to be the beginning, the start of the inhale, the moment of birth, the beginning of a creative project. And his consort, his feminine energy equal, is Saraswati. And she is known to be, who you call on when you're beginning studies or learning a new instrument or song or going toward a new degree, something like that. So she's really called in these times of using your voice or using knowledge and beginning a creative endeavor. Then you have Vishnu. Vishnu has come in many different forms, Ram, Krishna, Buddha, and he's really sort of represents the sustenance, the nowness, the presence, represents the highest teachings, knowledge beyond intellect, like wisdom that goes through all times, that lives in this present moment. And his consort is Lakshmi. His feminine energy is Lakshmi. Lakshmi is said to be really called upon in times of desiring a sense of abundance or enoughness, or that you look around and you feel prosperous with all that you have, meaning even if it's a quarter in your pocket and a deep breath, or whatever it is, just this way of experiencing the grace of life, of this one breath. And then Shiva is said to be completion and ending a relationship or completing a job and
that like destruction quality almost too, right?
For sure. And the fires that are raging right north of me. So if you hear me coughing, it's probably that. So excuse me. But yeah, so destruction and endings and the celebration of life in its full arc, meaning to say that we also celebrate. You'll see, images of quote unquote Shiva, and in the way that we have now, been offered him dancing on graves, basically like this was a good pass through. Here we go.
Right. Which for people who don't know the backstory, it's a little upsetting.
Yeah. And it's beautiful. He rubs the ash of bodies on his body, and devotees rub ash on their body. So too will I go, and it all goes into that. And what creates suffering so much, and you see it everywhere, is that we think life should be, and the things that we like should be permanent. And it's not. And Shiva is here, and that teaching is very much here about embracing impermanence. And his consort and his counterparts, feminine, counterparts. And again, it's not ladies. It's just like the energy that comes through. And that's, Shakti. But Shakti shows up as Durga, as Kali, as many different versions of this sort of more wild and completing and fierce variations, because it takes a lot to let go. It takes a lot to let go, whether it's when you're losing a loved one, whether, you lose financial gain or your sense of security, whatever it might be.
I love how you did this breakdown. And I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, which was this idea of chanting and mantra. I'd love it if you'd link, if there is a link, I'm assuming there's a link, of how the chanting and the mantra connects perhaps to these deities. But I loved what you said about it, like bringing you back into the heart space and melting duality. Because I think in our day-to-day life, right, we're in this linear analytical space, and, you know, we're trying to decide like X or Y, or, you know, go left or right. And I found myself too, personally, like the chanting practice just brings you into this place where none of that matters anymore somehow. So I'd love for you to tell us more about that. And you used a very specific word when you talked about the heart center. What was that word?
Hridaya or Hridayam.
Yeah, tell us more about that.
That's really the spiritual heart center of us. You know, when we talk about the heart in yoga, sure, it's the pulsing, beating heart, but it's really more of a spiritual heart space that, again, it doesn't suffer from the sense of duality, because the heart, you know, and the actual physical heart can, you know, if people need to grasp onto something, is always pumping, open, close, open, close, open, close. It's not preferring one or the other. It's really needs both. It needs completion and it needs beginning, and it needs all the stuff in between. The spiritual heart, you know, the center of our being, what is beyond sort of the impermanence of the body and this wild, vast, infinite spaciousness that we have access to as well, right? This infinite grace, and also our day-to-day body. And then we have the heart and the spiritual heart. And in mantra, let me just sort of clarify, mantra is often handed down and really is said to be handed down from teacher to student. So most of what we're doing collectively these days is actually chanting. We can use a particular mantra, especially if it's been sort of offered from a teacher to a teacher to a teacher, and then that teacher's offering it out, you know, to the mass. And then, you know, when I was mentioning individually, right? So you give that mantra or that chant attention, and it just sort of melts some of the busy of the mind. Then you bring it into a group setting. You bring it into a community setting. You just imagine in a space. Well, just imagine a yoga space where everyone's come in and they're busy from their day and how they got there. They got parking problems, and then the bus was late, and they come up and they got to pay, but their card has been denied, and then where they put their shoes, and, you know, everyone's just got their thing, and then they got to find their spot in there. It's like, oh man, that's my spot, and someone's in my spot, and then someone else comes in still wearing it. You know, it's a lot is happening. And then let's just say we sit down, and then we own. And then maybe we call toward Ganesh, the Lord of New Beginnings, or this sort of aspect of new beginnings, or remover of obstacles. And all these voices that were all in their head and all separated and all having their separate agenda, all of them. But they all had an agenda when they arrived. And in that moment, it melts and it becomes, even for an instant, unified. That is so potent. And I found for myself that no amount of me explaining unification comes even remotely close to when we all put our voices into something. And this has been happening since time immemorial, since we can really trace back, where we started being able to make sounds as human beings, that we would collectivize that sound and that voice for, you know, the native peoples, the indigenous's, that, you know, and all around the globe, where they can sort of trace this placing attention on the collective voice.
I always like to share that as well with people who I think are maybe nervous to join in a chanting class, or, you know, hesitant to explore this part of the practice, that this isn't something that's unique to the yogic tradition, right? This is something that every culture since the beginning of time has been doing as a way to bring people together. And I know that Sanskrit as a language is a vibrational language. So there's potentially here like benefits to just, for people who are like huge skeptics, right? I sometimes hear that there's benefits to just saying the words, but do you agree? Like, can you talk? What are your thoughts on that?
My dear friend Harvey Deutsch, he's really talks actually about the physical anatomy of chanting, of vibration, and using your voice. Really check him out if you guys get a chance. And he's amazing. But also, I don't necessarily need to know the anatomy because I experience it. And if you give yourself over to it in a place where you feel you're held and you trust, then you go for the experience and not the sort of intellectualizing of the experience. But yes, it's there and present. And I celebrate people who feel wary about it. I appreciate that. And in no way it's like blind trust, run and fall into this thing that doesn't make sense to you. But from an experiential point of view, when it's happening, I don't want to say there is no mind, but there's very little. It diminishes. The thrum and constant pound of the mind seems to rest back toward the heart.
And if people want to get started at home, I know it can be almost more intimidating sometimes to be in a group setting. Is what you'd suggest maybe listening to a mantra or a tape several times and then just joining in with your own voice at home is the best way for someone who's curious to get started?
Yeah, really. I mean, just finding something, maybe there's something out there that moves you. Maybe it's Krishna Das. I have an album out that's very simple, and it's just repetition and really things that are alive inside of me. And Deva Premal and Jayu Tal and these people who maybe, if you're just playing in the background or instead of listening to NPR all the time or rap all the time or whatever, that, you plug that in every once in a while. And I will tell you, it's just, if it sparks, if something moves you, then beautiful. And if not, that's fine as well. And then maybe you find live events. And I've certainly been to live events where I don't feel it at all. I don't feel it. It doesn't feel alive for me. And I'm also okay with that. And so don't give up on it, essentially is what I'm saying. And know that there might be, a place or something that sparks, and there might not be. And that's absolutely fine. And it could be maybe Brahminical chanting that moves you. And it's, that's more sort of monotone and just goes about its purpose of moving the mantra out into the world.
Yeah, I've been practicing myself just chanting 8 minutes of Satnam, long Sat, short Nam, and it's so simple and it's really like, to get the biggest bang for your buck for 8 minutes of time spent, doing something, it is so powerful. And I think listening when you do the dishes or clean the house is so great too. I noticed, especially since becoming pregnant, I didn't want to listen to more of like the rap or pop music that I'd even just listen to when working out occasionally, like all of a sudden I was just like, I don't want any of that. I don't know if it's energy or the word, bad words or something, but it was just like, no. And just listening to the chants has been so magical. And you just listen, and all of a sudden you realize you're like, oh, I'm singing along, like I know the words. And then you're thinking about them even when your, AirPods or the headphones aren't in, right? It's like still going when you wake up, when you fall asleep. And that's really cool because you're like, wow, I've sort of maybe replaced some monkey mind, like vritti type thoughts and activity with these mantras.
Yeah, exactly. And that's it. Because the monkey mind's going to be going all the time. And to give focus, give attention, and it doesn't need to be complicated. Don't need to learn the Chalisa. It could be Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om. Or it can just be Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om. Satnam, 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 8 minutes, whatever. You're driving and you notice you're frustrated, and finding a place for you to give your attention that's not just chasing our regular grooved behaviors.
We live in a culture, because I want to make sure we really talk about this before we close and let you go, where it's about more all the time. Right? Like more clothes, more things we should buy, even like more yoga retreats we should go. It's just this more asana, more time. And I know one of the things you're passionate about sharing with people right now is this concept of enough, right? How to move from maybe a place of lack or a mindset of, I wish I had this, I wish I could do this, to a place of enoughness.
Yeah, it's a practice. It's an absolute full endeavor practice. Like the mind and the way that we're built really focuses on making sure we have enough. Now, we live in a place, in a society where we have way more than we need on a physical, external level, right? And yet we're still living in this where we wake up and the list of lack, of not enough, is what gets our attention. As we move through our day and see visual images of like, oh, that body, that thing, that shirt, that practice, that status, that place. It's just always like in that column of lack. Our attention just goes over there often. And the practice, so basic and so potent, is to make another column and really give your attention effort. You'll have to use your effort and your will to go into the enough column. I have breath. That's enough. I've got my lungs are working. My heart is pumping, just back to basic things. My body is functioning in this way, in that way. If it's not functioning in its totality, the amount of food I have is enough. The love I give is enough. The love I get is enough. Even if you really want to run back to that lack column, it's just this constant and continuous and daily practice of enoughness. And whether you begin by just making that list daily of all the things that are enough and give even a moment of attention to that, that's a beautiful place to start, because we have to be compassionate with ourselves that this is our tendency, right? To go for not enough. And you see it in the yoga practice, you see it in the yoga world, you feel it on your yoga mat of like, my hamstring's not really letting me go in deep enough, or, whatever the case may be. My heart opener is not as big as I want it to be today. And
I didn't meditate for long enough.
Yeah, I didn't meditate long enough, and I didn't learn 10 more chants or whatever it might be. But really that practice, bringing again and again compassion towards self, and really recognizing the Shri, the Lakshmi, the Shri is sort of auspiciousness of life itself. Like, it's stunning and amazing, and all that has to happen for just one life to be sustained is mind-boggling when you give it attention. And so just giving that attention and making that a practice.
No, and I like what you're saying about appreciating and bringing in the self-compassion, because we are hardwired to be this way. Because, back in the day, we probably didn't have enough. It's like survival, right? So we're like these creatures who are now in this abundant time period where it's like most of us don't have to wake up and panic about, how we're going to feed ourselves on a day-to-day basis.
But we have actually the opposite. We're really, it's glutton. It's too much. It's really too much for us to digest, and not just food-wise, but just in stuff. We can't even digest all that we have. And it's like we're just being told to have more. And again, that's all the way from your yoga practice, meditation, pranayamas, chants, all the way to relational, to stuff, physical stuff, money. We can't even take in all that we have.
Is there a particular deity that you work with when you're trying to shift into this enoughness mindset? Maybe one of the ones you've mentioned so far?
Yeah, so it's Lakshmi, and Lakshmi really, as she carries her right hand in Abhaya Mudra. Abhaya Mudra is the palm open forward and soft, and it's really fearlessness, right? Just fearless in the face of whatever life has to offer. And then her other hand, her left palm, is open and like pouring out, and you'll usually see it pouring out money, gold, whatever it is, but it's this sense of standing, giving fully all the beauty and all the riches, in a sense, not literal, but in the spiritual level and the life level as well.
How do you invoke Lakshmi? What would you tell people at home where they're like, I want to invoke her?
It is the practices of enoughness. I chant to her. I have, images, or I have practices where I pause and actually look at, it's usually nature or my children, and just look at all the things that are so miraculous and beautiful. The color of my children's eyes. I'll just get in there and be, that to me is a Lakshmi practice, because I could be mad that they, left the dishes all over the house and didn't do this thing and didn't do that, or talked back or whatever, but a Lakshmi practice is not avoidance of any of those things, but to really just pause and go, oh, wow, amazing. It's here, they're here, I'm here. This moment is so incredibly precious. And you hear me right now, I'm sort of on the harmonium and playing the chords to Om Namo Lakshmi, Om Namo Lakshmi, Om Namo Lakshmi, Prema, which is love, Devi, goddess, Mataji, mother. So love, goddess, mother. And then Shri Ma, Jai Ma, Jai Jai Ma. So, it's like that.
It's beautiful. And the last question I want to ask you has to do with this idea of doing and being, right? Because I think we hear you on the harmonium and everything you're talking about. It's just, I feel how just in flow you are and how relaxed. At the same time, I've been to your website, right? I know how much you're doing, traveling, teaching, leading retreats. And I think this is something everyone who's listening is struggling with, right? Like, how do we get stuff done, but still cultivate this energy that I feel from you, just like talking to you through a computer, right? How are you doing that? And what advice do you have as a closing for people listening?
So in the midst of doing, really practice just being. I get on airplanes, I fly everywhere, I get to my children's games and plays and take them where they need to go, and the bills to pay and the things to clean. And I really include all of that in part of my being, because these are the things that are my priorities and important to me. And so clarifying my intention day in and day out allows me to sort of rest in and just relax into whatever the movement has. And so I think my advice or any sort of offering would simply be that what we have and what we're doing is truly circling back enough. And so it doesn't have to be that complicated. It really doesn't have to be that complicated. So in the midst of me doing this and that and going this place and that, is that I do my best to keep it really simple, and not overcomplicated. And this goes back to, my very first teacher in this practice. It doesn't have to make it. Our mind loves to make it so complicated to get there. And the trick is that we're here. All that we're looking for is here. All that we're striving for, all the books that we're reading, all the things we're trying to get to are actually present now. You can't have the later time. So I don't do it for a later something. So if I'm going to be doing something, I want to be as there as possible.
I love it. Thank you so, so much for your time, for sharing so much knowledge and tips. And if people want to stay more connected with you, what's the best place for them to find you?
Oh my goodness, look at this amazing world where we're so connected from far away. Yeah, really just janetstoneyoga.com, or on Instagram, Janet Stone Yoga, Facebook, Janet Stone Yoga. It's just pretty simple, and whatever feels right. Anyways, anyone wants to reach out, ask more questions, they can email us just right through the website. It comes right to me. So we are so happy to stay connected, so happy that, there are voices out there and interest in ancient practice in the modern day.
Wonderful. We'll make sure to put all the links to your website and social media below. Listeners, thank you so much for listening all the way to the very end. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Janet and her music now still as much as I did. I hope you feel inspired, grounded, and that you make it to a beautiful, luxurious meditation seat today, or just to sit and be, as Janet talked about in the very beginning of our call. Thank you so much for being here, and from our hearts to yours, namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.